Marcus Stone sat in the corner booth of the small downtown diner, his fingers tracing the worn edge of the laminated menu he couldn't read. The sounds around him painted a familiar picture: the sizzle of bacon on the griddle, the gentle clink of coffee cups meeting saucers, the soft murmur of conversation between strangers who had found warmth on this cold February evening. He had been coming to this place for 3 weeks now, always the same booth, always alone, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was the authenticity of it all, so different from the sterile boardrooms and marble-floored penthouses that had defined his world for the past 30 years. Here, nobody knew he was worth $400 million. Here, nobody whispered about the tech empire he had built from nothing. Here, he was just another customer waiting for his order. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The dinner rush was winding down when she approached his table. Marcus heard the soft pad of worn sneakers against linoleum, the gentle rustle of a uniform that had seen too many shifts. He sensed her hesitation before she spoke, the way people often paused when they realized he couldn't see them. "Good evening," came the voice, and Marcus felt something deep inside his chest shift like tectonic plates finding new ground. "I'm Elena, and I'll be describing your meal tonight. I hope that's all right." The words were simple, professional, but the voice that carried them was anything but ordinary. It was warm honey over gravel, smooth yet textured with a lifetime of stories. There was a slight tremor in it, barely perceptible, as if she were nervous or perhaps fighting back some deeper emotion. Marcus had learned to read voices the way others read faces, and this one spoke of resilience wrapped in gentleness, of someone who had known both great joy and profound sorrow. "That would be perfect," Marcus managed, though his throat had suddenly gone dry. "Thank you, Elena." She moved with practiced efficiency, setting down what he assumed was his plate with barely a sound. The care in her movements was evident, even to someone who couldn't see them. There was respect in the way she handled his space, an understanding that came from experience. "You've ordered our Friday special," Elena began, her voice settling into a rhythm that suggested she had done this many times before. "Pan-seared salmon with a honey glaze, positioned at 12 o'clock on your plate. The fish has a beautiful, golden crust, and the glaze catches the light like amber. Next to it, at 3 o'clock, we have roasted asparagus spears, bright green and tender, with just a hint of char on the tips." As she spoke, Marcus found himself transported. It wasn't just her descriptions that captivated him, though they were remarkably vivid. It was something in the cadence of her speech, the particular way she emphasized certain words, the tiny pause she took before saying "beautiful," that made his heart skip in a way it hadn't in decades. "At 9 o'clock, Elena continued, you'll find our signature wild rice pilaf. It's a mixture of textures and colors, dark and light grains mixed with tiny pieces of dried cranberries that look like little jewels scattered throughout. And finally, at 6 o'clock, there's a small ramekin of our house-made tartar sauce, creamy white with flecks of fresh herbs." Marcus lifted his fork, but found his hand trembling slightly. That voice, that particular melody in her speech, was unlocking doors in his memory that he had sealed shut 30 years ago. It was impossible, of course. The rational part of his mind, the part that had built a technology empire through logic and calculated risks, told him he was being foolish. Voices changed over 3 decades. People moved on, built new lives, became different versions of themselves. But the heart, Marcus had learned, was rarely rational. "Is everything all right, sir?" Elena asked, and there was genuine concern in her voice now. The kind of concern that couldn't be taught or faked, that came from someone who truly cared about the well-being of others. "Yes," Marcus said quietly, taking a bite of the salmon. It was perfectly cooked, flaky and flavorful, but he barely tasted it. "You describe things beautifully. Have you? Have you always worked here?" There was a pause, longer than necessary for such a simple question. When Elena spoke again, Her voice had changed almost imperceptibly, becoming more guarded. "About 6 months now," she said. "I moved to the city recently." "From where?" Marcus asked, then immediately felt foolish for prying. But something compelled him to know more, to chase this feeling that was both wonderful and terrifying. Another pause. "A small town up north. You probably wouldn't know it." But Marcus was beginning to suspect he might know it very well indeed. His pulse quickened as fragments of memory began to surface, like photographs developing in a darkroom. A summer 30 years ago when he was fresh out of college, working his first real job at a tech startup in a small town outside of Seattle. A voice just like this one, belonging to a girl who had changed the trajectory of his entire life in the span of 3 months. "Elena," he said carefully, "forgive me if this sounds strange, but have we met before?" The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could hear the distant conversation of other diners, the hum of the air conditioning, the soft jazz playing from speakers somewhere overhead. But from Elena came nothing, not even the sound of breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I should check on my other tables." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. It wasn't a denial, wasn't confusion or polite dismissal. It was retreat, pure and simple. The kind of retreat that confirmed everything he was beginning to suspect. And fear and hope for all at once. "Wait," he said, reaching out instinctively. His hand found hers where it rested on the table, and the contact sent electricity through his entire body. Her skin was warm, slightly rough from hard work, but unmistakably familiar. "Please." "Elena, is it Elena Rodriguez?" He felt her hand tremble beneath his, felt the sharp intake of breath that told him everything he needed to know. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they remained connected, 30 years of separation bridged by the simple touch of skin against skin. Then she pulled away. "I have to go," she whispered, and Marcus heard the scrape of her shoes against the floor as she hurried away. He sat alone in the booth, his dinner growing cold, his mind reeling with the implications of what had just happened. Elena Rodriguez, the girl who had been his entire world for one perfect summer in 1994. The girl who had vanished from his life without explanation, leaving him with questions that had haunted him for 3 decades. And now she was here, in this small diner, describing his food with the same careful attention to detail that she had once brought to everything in her life. The same voice that had read him poetry under star-filled skies, that had whispered his name in moments of intimacy, that had said goodbye to him for what he thought was the last time 30 years ago. Marcus reached for his phone, muscle memory, guiding his fingers to the speed dial that would summon his driver. But then he hesitated. What was he doing? Was he really going to chase after a woman who had just fled from him? Was he going to let one chance encounter in a diner overturn 30 years of carefully constructed life? The answer, he realized, with startling clarity, was yes. Because some voices, once heard, could never be forgotten. And some people, once loved, left marks on the soul that time could never erase. Marcus Stone had spent 3 decades becoming one of the most powerful men in technology. He had built companies, influenced markets, shaped the digital future of millions of people. But in this moment, sitting in a small diner with a plate of cooling salmon before him, he felt like the 24-year-old man he had been when Elena Rodriguez first walked into his life. And this time, he wasn't going to let her.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Walk away. The next morning found Marcus in his penthouse office, 40 floors above the city, but his mind was entirely elsewhere. His assistant, David, had been briefing him on the quarterly projections for their latest software release, but Marcus hadn't absorbed a single word. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the small diner far below, just a dot in the urban landscape, but it might as well have been the center of the universe. "Mr. Stone," David's voice cut through his reverie. "Should I reschedule the board meeting for this afternoon?" Marcus turned from the window, his unseeing eyes focusing in David's general direction. "What board meeting?" David's pause was telling. Marcus Stone never forgot meetings, never missed details, never allowed his personal life to interfere with business. It was one of the qualities that had made him legendary in the tech world. The quarterly review with the investors, David said carefully. You've been preparing for it all month. Reschedule it, Marcus said without hesitation. In fact, clear my calendar for the rest of the week. Sir, I'm not sure I understand. The investors flew in specifically for this meeting, and the product launch next month requires your direct oversight. David, Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built an empire. How long have you worked for me? 12 years, sir. In those 12 years, have I ever asked you to do something without good reason? No, sir. Never. Then trust me now. Clear my calendar, reschedule the meetings, and if anyone asks, tell them I'm handling a matter of critical importance. David gathered his papers with the efficiency of someone who had learned not to question Marcus Stone's decisions. Of course. Sir, should I inform your driver that you'll need transportation today? No, Marcus said, already moving toward his private elevator. I'll be walking. The walk to the diner took 47 minutes, each step a meditation on the past and a prayer for the future. Marcus had walked these streets countless times in his youth, before the accident that had taken his sight at 26, before the settlement money had become the seed capital for his first company, before success had insulated him from the simple act of moving through the world on foot. Now, guided by the white cane he rarely needed to use anymore thanks to the familiar routes his driver normally took, he rediscovered the rhythm of the city. The sounds, smells, and textures that painted a picture more vivid than sight had ever provided. Street vendors calling out their wares, the rumble of buses, the click of heels on pavement, the thousand small dramas of urban life playing out around him. By the time he reached the diner, the lunch rush was in full swing. Marcus stood outside for several minutes, listening to the ebb and flow of conversation through the windows, wondering if Elena was inside, wondering if she would speak to him if she was. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and the hostess approached immediately. Table for one? She asked brightly. Actually, I was hoping to speak with Elena. Elena Rodriguez. I believe she works here? The hostess hesitated. Elena's not working today. She called in sick this morning. Marcus felt his heart sink, but pressed on. Would it be possible to get her address? I'm an old friend, and I'm sorry, but we can't give out employee information. The hostess's voice had cooled considerably. Company policy. Marcus nodded, understanding but disappointed. He was about to leave when another voice spoke up from behind the counter. You're the man from last night. Marcus turned toward the voice, which belonged to an older woman with a slight accent he couldn't quite place. Yes, I was here yesterday evening. I'm Rosa, the night manager. Elena mentioned you. There was something in her tone that suggested Elena had said more than just mentioning him. She seemed upset after your conversation. I didn't mean to upset her, Marcus said quietly. We knew each other a long time ago. I was just surprised to see her again. Rosa was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could sense her evaluating him, weighing something in her mind. Finally, she spoke again. She works the evening shift tomorrow. If you want to talk to her, that might be your best chance. But sir? Her voice took on a protective edge. Elena's a good woman. She's been through enough. Whatever happened between you two in the past, don't make it worse for her now. The warning was clear, and Marcus respected the loyalty it represented. I would never hurt her intentionally, he said. I need to understand what happened, why she left. Rosa studied him for another long moment, then her voice softened slightly. Some stories are painful to tell, and some people run from the past because facing it hurts too much. With that cryptic advice, Rosa returned to her work, leaving Marcus to find his way out of the diner and back into the bustling street. But her words echoed in his mind as he made the long walk home. Some people run from the past because facing it hurts too much. What had hurt Elena so badly 30 years ago that she was still running from it now? That evening, Marcus sat in his study, a room lined with books he could no longer read, but kept anyway for the comfort of their presence. His fingers moved across his phone's screen, navigating the voice-activated internet search that would have been impossible when he first lost his sight, but which technology had made seamless. Search Elena Rodriguez, Seattle area, 1994, he spoke to his phone. The results were sparse and mostly irrelevant. Elena was a common name, and 1994 predated the digital footprints that made people easy to find online. But Marcus was nothing, if not persistent. He had built his fortune on the belief that any problem could be solved with enough determination and the right resources. Over the next several hours, he employed every tool at his disposal. Private investigators, public record searches, social media algorithms that could track connections across decades. It was amazing what money and influence could accomplish when properly applied. But the picture that emerged was frustratingly incomplete. Elena Rodriguez had indeed lived in the Seattle area in 1994. She had worked at the same small tech company where Marcus had his first job out of college. And then, in late August of that year, she had simply disappeared. No forwarding address, no continued employment history, no trace of her existence for several years afterward. When she reappeared in the digital record, it was in Phoenix, Arizona, working as a nurse's aide at a local hospital. There was a marriage license from 1997 to a man named Carlos Mendoza, and then divorce papers from 2003. After that, the trail grew cold again until just 6 months ago, when she had applied for a food handler's license in the city and started working at the diner. But there were gaps, huge spaces of time where Elena Rodriguez seemed to have vanished from the world entirely. And Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that those gaps held the answers to questions he was afraid to ask. His research had revealed one other disturbing detail. In the months after Elena had disappeared from Seattle, there had been a series of articles in the local paper about a family tragedy, a house fire that had claimed the lives of an elderly couple named Rodriguez. Elena's grandparents, according to the obituary. The fire had been deemed accidental, caused by faulty wiring in their old home. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Elena had left Seattle just weeks before her grandparents died, and the article mentioned that their granddaughter had been too distraught to attend the funeral services. Marcus set his phone aside and leaned back in his chair, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form a picture he wasn't sure he wanted to see. What had happened in those final weeks of summer 1994? What had driven Elena away from everything she knew, including him? And why, 30 years later, was she waiting tables in a diner instead of living the life they had once dreamed of together? The questions tormented him through a sleepless night, and by morning, Marcus had made a decision. He would go back to the diner that evening. He would wait for Elena's shift to begin. And this time, he wouldn't let her run away before he got the answers he needed, even if those answers destroyed the beautiful memory he had carried of their time together for 30 years. The diner felt different on Saturday evening. The weekend crowd was livelier, families with children, couples on dates, groups of friends celebrating the end of another week. Marcus had positioned himself in the same corner booth as 2 nights before, but this time he was prepared for a long wait. He had arrived an hour before Elena's shift was scheduled to begin, partly to secure the booth and partly because he was too nervous to stay away any longer. The events of the past few days had disrupted his carefully ordered life in ways he was still trying to understand. Marcus Stone was a man who planned everything, who left nothing to chance, who approached every situation with multiple contingency strategies. But Elena Rodriguez had always been his weakness when it came to planning. Even 30 years ago, she had been unpredictable in the most wonderful way. Where Marcus saw obstacles, Elena saw adventures. Where he calculated risks, she followed her heart. She had taught him to dance in the rain, to eat ice cream for breakfast, to believe that some things in life were worth pursuing even when success wasn't guaranteed. And then she had vanished, taking all those lessons with her. At exactly 6 o'clock, Marcus heard the kitchen door swing open and the familiar sound of Elena's footsteps crossing the dining room. His heart rate increased as he tracked her movement through the restaurant, greeting other customers, taking orders, moving with the efficient grace he remembered from their summer together. For 20 minutes, she managed to avoid his section entirely. Marcus began to wonder if she was intentionally staying away from his booth, if Rosa had warned her that he was here. But eventually, the demands of her job brought her to his corner of the restaurant. "Good evening," she said, and Marcus could hear the tension in her voice. "Can I start you with something to drink?" The professional distance in her tone was like a wall between them, but Marcus had spent 30 years learning to read the subtle cues that most people missed. Beneath the cool formality, he could hear the same tremor that had been in her voice 2 nights ago. Fear, yes, but also something else. Longing, perhaps, or regret. "Coffee, please," Marcus said gently. "And Elena? I'd like to talk, if you have a moment." "I'm working," she replied quickly. "I can't, then I'll wait. However long it takes." The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Finally, Elena sighed, and Marcus heard the soft sound of her sitting down across from him in the booth. "5 minutes," she said. "That's all I can spare." Marcus nodded, grateful for even that small concession, now that the moment had arrived. However, he found himself struggling for words. How did you bridge 30 years of silence? How did you ask someone why they had broken your heart without sounding accusatory? "You look exactly as I remember you," he said finally, then immediately. "Felt foolish. I mean, your voice. The way you move. It's all exactly the same." Elena was quiet for a moment before responding. "You can't see me anymore." It wasn't a question, and there was no pity in her voice, just a statement of fact. Marcus appreciated that more than she could know. "I lost my sight about 2 years after you left," he said. "Car accident. But you're right. I remember everything about how you used to move, how you sounded. Some things don't change. Everything changes," Elena said quietly. 30 years is a long time, Marcus." The sound of his name in her voice was almost overwhelming. He had imagined hearing her say it again countless times over the decades, but the reality was infinitely more powerful than any memory. "Why did you leave?" The question escaped before he could stop it, raw and vulnerable in a way that Marcus hadn't allowed himself to be in years. Elena's sharp intake of breath was audible across the table. "You really don't know? I've spent 30 years trying to figure it out. One day we were planning our future together, talking about moving to San Francisco after I finished the project. The next day you were gone. No note, no explanation, no forwarding address. Even your grandmother didn't know where you went." The mention of her grandmother seemed to hit Elena like a physical blow. Marcus heard her breath catch, heard the soft sound that might have been a stifled sob. "My grandmother," she whispered. "You talked to my grandmother? I went to your house the day after you disappeared. She said you had left in the middle of the night, that you told her you had to go but wouldn't say where. She was worried sick about you, Elena. We both were." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sounds of the dinner service, continuing around them. When Elena spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "She died 3 weeks later. In the fire." "I know," Marcus said gently. "I read about it in the paper. I tried to find you then, to be there for you, but no one knew where you had gone." "I couldn't go back," Elena whispered. "After what I had done, after the choice I made, I couldn't face anyone from that life, including you, especially you." Marcus felt his heart racing. What choice? "Elena, what happened that made you leave?" But before she could answer, another waitress approached their table. "Elena, table 6 is asking for their check, and the kitchen needs to know about the substitution for table 12. Elena wiped her eyes quickly and stood up. "I have to get back to work." "Wait," Marcus said, reaching across the table. "Please, when can we talk? Really talk?" Elena hesitated, and Marcus could sense the internal battle she was fighting. Part of her wanted to run again, to disappear as completely as she had 30 years ago. But another part, the part that had once loved him with fierce intensity, was tired of running. "I get off at 11, she said finally. "There's a small park 3 blocks north of here. If you really want to know what happened, meet me there." As her footsteps faded away across the dining room, Marcus sat back in the booth and tried to calm his racing heart. In 3 hours, he would finally learn the truth about the summer that had defined his entire life. The summer when he had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with a girl who had vanished like smoke. The summer that had ended with a choice so devastating that Elena had been running from it for 30 years. Whatever that choice had been, Marcus was about to discover that some secrets were buried so deep that digging them up changed everything. You thought you knew about your own life. The park was small and quiet at 11:30 on a Saturday night. Just a few benches surrounded by old oak trees and the distant sound of traffic from the main street. Marcus had arrived early, wanting to be sure he didn't miss Elena, terrified that she might change her mind and not show up at all. When he heard her footsteps on the gravel path, his heart nearly stopped. She was here. After 30 years of wondering, of incomplete answers and sleepless nights, he was finally going to learn the truth. Elena sat down beside him on the bench, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and floral that was completely different from the musky scent she used to wear. Everything about her had changed, he realized, except for the things that mattered most. Her voice, her laugh, the particular way she breathed when she was nervous. "I don't know where to start," she said quietly. "Start with why you left," Marcus replied. "Start with what happened that last night." Elena was silent for so long that Marcus began to worry she had changed her mind, that she was going to get up and walk away again. But finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you remember my cousin Maria?" Marcus frowned, searching his memory. "Vaguely. She was younger than us, right? I only met her a few times. She was 17, and she was pregnant." The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. Marcus felt something cold settling in his stomach, though he didn't yet understand why. "I don't understand what that has to do with us," he said carefully. Elena turned toward him, and though he couldn't see her face, he could feel the intensity of her gaze. "The father was your boss, Marcus. David Reeves, the CEO of the company where we both worked." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. David Reeves, the man who had given him his first real opportunity in tech, who had mentored him and taught him everything about building a business. David, who had been married with 2 children, who had spoken passionately about family values and corporate responsibility. That's impossible," Marcus stammered. "David wouldn't. He was a good man, a family man. He was a predator," Elena said, her voice hard with old anger. "Maria was just a kid working in the mailroom, trying to earn money for college. He pressured her, manipulated her, made her believe he cared about her. And when she got pregnant, he threatened to fire her and make sure she never worked anywhere else if she told anyone." Marcus felt sick. The David Reeves he remembered bore no resemblance to the man Elena was describing, but even as he wanted to deny it, pieces were falling into place. David's frequent absences from the office, his particular attention to young female employees, his insistence on hiring attractive women for positions that didn't require their qualifications. "Maria came to me because she didn't know what else to do," Elena continued. "She was terrified, alone, and desperate. She begged me to help her figure out what to do." "So you helped her," Marcus said, beginning to understand. "That's what you would do. You always helped people who needed it. I told her to report him to HR. I told her to stand up for herself, that she had rights, that he couldn't get away with what he had done." Elena's voice broke slightly. "I was so naive, Marcus. I really believed the system would protect her. What happened? She filed a complaint, told them everything, and within a week, she was fired for theft. David claimed she had been stealing office supplies, and he had a witness to back up his story. A witness who later got promoted to assistant manager." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of a truth he should have seen 30 years ago. And because she had been fired for theft, no one would hire her anywhere else. Her family disowned her for bringing shame on them. She had nowhere to go, no money, no support, and she was 5 months pregnant with his child. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place now, creating a picture that made Marcus feel physically ill. He was beginning to understand why Elena had left, why she had run away from their life together. "You knew I was working on a special project for David," he said quietly. "You knew how much I looked up to him, how grateful I was for the opportunity he had given me. I came to you the night before I left," Elena said, her voice trembling with the memory. "I told you everything. I begged you to help Maria, to stand up to David, to use your influence to do something." Marcus felt his world tilting on its axis. "You came to me?" "Elena, I don't remember. I never saw you that night." Elena turned to face him fully, and he could hear the tears in her voice when she spoke again. "You were drunk, Marcus, celebrating the completion of your project, the promotion David had promised you. You were so excited about your future, about our future, about all the doors that were opening for you." The memory came back in fragments, hazy and incomplete. The celebration at the office, drinks with the team, stumbling home to his apartment sometime after midnight. He had been drunk that night, drunker than he had ever been before or since, giddy with success and possibility. "When I told you about Maria, about what David had done, you didn't believe me," Elena continued. "You said Maria was lying, trying to trap a successful man. You said David would never do something like that he was a good man who had given you everything." Marcus felt as though he were drowning. Fragments of that night were coming back to him now, pieces of a conversation he had been too drunk to fully process or remember. Elena standing in his apartment, tears streaming down her face, trying to tell him something important while he dismissed her concerns and focused on his own celebration. "You chose him," Elena whispered. "When I forced you to choose between believing me and protecting your career, you chose him. You chose your future over the truth. Over Maria. Over me." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus sat on the park bench, 30 years too late, finally understanding the choice that had cost him everything that mattered. He had failed Elena when she needed him most, had failed Maria, had failed to see the truth about a man he had idolized. "What happened to Maria?" he asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. "She lost the baby," Elena said quietly. "The stress, the poverty, the lack of medical care. She miscarried at 7 months. After that, she never recovered. Not really. She struggled with depression, with addiction. She's been in and out of treatment facilities for years." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, the weight of a tragedy he had been too blind and too selfish to prevent. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I was young and stupid, and I left because I couldn't bear to look at you anymore," Elena interrupted. "Not after I realized that the man I loved, the man I thought I knew, cared more about his career than about justice, more about protecting his mentor than protecting an innocent girl." The truth was devastating in its simplicity. Marcus had spent 30 years believing that Elena had left for mysterious reasons, that their love had been derailed by circumstances beyond their control. But the reality was far more damning. She had left because she had seen who he really was in that crucial moment, and she hadn't liked what she found. "I tried to forget you," Elena said, her voice growing stronger. "I moved away, changed my name, built a new life. I married a good man who cared about justice, who spent his life helping people. We were happy for a while. What happened? Cancer. He died 6 years ago." Elena's voice was steady now, matter of fact. "That's when I realized I had never really stopped loving you, despite everything. Despite what you did, despite what you chose. I carried that love with me for 30 years. And I hated myself for it." Marcus reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly, but she let him hold them. "Is that why you're here?" he asked. "In this city, working at that diner?" Elena was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I saw an article about you in a magazine, about how you lost your sight, about the foundation you started to help victims of corporate abuse. I read about all the good you've done, all the people you've helped over the years. And I realized that maybe you had learned something from that night. Maybe you had become the man I thought you were back then." Marcus felt his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. She had been watching him from afar, following his journey, hoping that he had grown into someone worthy of the love she had given him. The foundation, he said quietly. I started it because I learned what happened to girls like Maria when no one believes them, when no one protects them. I've spent 20 years trying to make up for the choice I made that night. I know, Elena whispered. That's why I came here. To see if it was real, if you had really changed, or if it was just good publicity. And what did you decide? Elena turned toward him, and he felt her other hand come up to touch his face gently, her thumb tracing the line of his cheek. I decided that people can change, she said softly. That sometimes the worst mistakes we make can teach us how to be better. That maybe 30 years of regret and trying to make amends counts for something. Marcus covered her hand with his, holding it against his face like a lifeline. I loved you, he said. I loved you more than anything in the world, and I was too proud and too scared to admit when I was wrong. I've regretted that night every single day for 30 years. I know, Elena said. I could see it in your face when I described your food that first night. You weren't just surprised to see me. You were devastated. Guilty. I could hear it in your voice. They sat in silence for several minutes, holding hands in the darkness, 30 years of pain and regret flowing between them like a river finally finding its way to the sea. Where do we go from here? Marcus asked finally. Elena was quiet for so long that he began to worry she was going to say they couldn't go anywhere, that knowing the truth didn't change anything, that some mistakes were too big to forgive. But when she spoke, her voice was soft with possibility. I don't know, she said honestly. I'm not the same person I was 30 years ago, and neither are you. We're strangers now, Marcus. Strangers with a shared history and a lot of pain between us. But, Marcus prompted, hearing something in her voice that gave him hope. But maybe strangers can get to know each other, Elena said. Maybe they can start over, if they're both willing to try. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. I'd like that. I'd like to know who you've become, Elena. And I'd like you to know who I am now, not who I was then. It won't be easy, she warned. There's a lot of hurt to work through, a lot of trust to rebuild. I know, Marcus said, but I've got time. All the time in the world, if that's what it takes. Elena laughed softly, and the sound was like music to his ears. You were always impatient, Marcus. Always in a hurry to get to the next thing. Not anymore, he said firmly. Some things are worth waiting for. Some things are worth doing slowly, carefully, the right way. As they sat together in the quiet park, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years. Not just hope, but the possibility of redemption. The chance to prove that people could change, that love could survive. Even the worst mistakes, that some stories deserved a second chapter. He had lost Elena once through his own blindness, his own failure to see what was right in front of him. But blindness, he had learned, wasn't always about the eyes. Sometimes it was about the heart, about the courage to face difficult truths and make the right choices, even when they came at great personal cost. This time, Marcus could see clearly, and what he saw was a future worth fighting for, one conversation at a time, one shared moment at a time, until trust could grow again between two hearts that had never really stopped beating for each other. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.